talking about the TEN-T core network corridors in the Baltic Sea region. We assume that this is a very fascinating moment in time, that we will see new governance structures established in 9 specific international corridors in our part of the world. Anyway, we do assume that this area already has some very important bottom-up and well-organized groups of stakeholders. So a very imminent question here is to what extent we can try to best fit what the Commission proposes with what actually is already operational on the ground. So there are a number of very interesting corridor cooperation structures that you may see here on the screen. This is just a fistful of them. And that is why we would like to take up this question with very good and very efficient, competent panelists. Dear panelists, you are most welcome to the scene. Applause to the panelists, please. Very good, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Please, still the applause. They are still coming in.
Danielsen.
Horst. Thank you very much. I think this is the sign of appreciation that we have gathered as many as 7 distinguished panelists.
More than
More participants.
I wouldn't say it's more than participants, but I think what matters is the quality and not the quantity of participation, because you as the participants will be given chance, of course, of asking questions and getting right responses. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Wiktor Szydarowski, manager of international projects related with transport and regional development, freelance consultant, and in my previous life, a manager of a BSR TransGovernance project that deals with how to actually improve the multi-level cooperation schemes and methods in the Baltic Sea region, bearing in mind diverse interests of different stakeholders at the EU, national, regional, local, and community level, including also the business perspective. Dear panelists, I would like you to briefly introduce yourselves, say who you are, and why you have come here. What's your relation to this beautiful question of the TEN-T core network corridors? Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Pond. That's with a P. Yeah, the joke has been made a few 100,000 times. My parents had a sense of humor. But I work as the advisor to Pavel, who you've heard a moment or two ago. First of all, on the Rail Baltic project, which we've been working on for 9 years. And now, since the new policy on the 9 TEN-T corridors, we are now working on the North Sea Baltic corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Oddgeir.
Thank you, Wiktor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oddgeir Danielsen. I'm the director of the Northern Dimension Partnership on Transport and Logistics Secretariat, located in Helsinki. To make the long story short, we are actually working on connecting all the European Union transport system with the outside countries, or the surrounding countries, and in particular then Russia, Norway, and Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Húlten. I work for the Swedish Transport Administration, which is a national state agency responsible for road, rail, sea, and air transportation in Sweden. We are a rather young agency. We were formed 4 years ago, and we are dealing with long-term planning of the transportation system, with construction, maintenance, and operation of the Swedish road and railway networks. So with that said, we have quite a big stake in the TEN-T corridors and TEN-T networks, naturally. We are both participants as project leaders of many TEN-T projects, especially concerning the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor, of course. We also have a more general responsibility for TEN-T in Sweden, in the way that we are supporting the government with evaluating project applications. We are coordinating Swedish applications, and we are monitoring the progress of projects that are with Swedish participants. So in that sense, we also have this more general role in TNT.
Thank you very much. Malla, please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Malla Paajanen. I represent an international business consortium called Proximare. And we are carrying out the corridor study for one of the 9 TEN-T core network corridors called North Sea Baltic, which runs from Helsinki through Baltic states, Poland, Germany, all the way down to the Netherlands and Belgium. So we are carrying out the corridor study during 2014 for the European Commission. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Matthias.
Yes. Good morning, everybody in the audience. Good morning to fellow panelists. I'm Mathias Roos, and as you can see from the agenda, I was supposed to the representative for the Blekinge region, which I come from in southeastern Sweden. The representative this morning should have been Mr. Jan Anders Palmqvist, a very dedicated politician who has been working with these international transport issues and TNT issues for 20 years. Our perspective to this is that we have been working with these TNT issues and the idea behind TNT policy of the single market enhancing competitiveness for ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we have all the time, as a, let's say, transit and a gateway region in the southeastern Baltic, tried to live up to the requirements. So we have been very much involved in these issues, and we will continue to do so in the future.
Thank you very much. Horst.
Well, welcome from my side too. My name is Horst Sauer. I'm from the Joint Spatial Planning Department, Berlin-Brandenburg, and what means I'm not a transport planner, I'm a spatial planner. But anyhow, we had been engaged very much with our transport units from Berlin-Brandenburg in the whole TEN-T revision process, mostly by indirect projects like Scandria project, and also other parts of our region had been partners in the Radical Growth project, so now North Sea Baltic corridor. And background of our engagement was a very inconvenient position in the former priority TEN-T axis. The capital region was simply the end of one priority axis, and a part of that, almost a hole in the network with no connections to Poland, no connections to Scandinavia, and that's what we tried to change, and also looking for new options for regional development. And looking to the current TEN-T network, I think not we only, but we together had been successful, because the capital region Berlin-Brandenburg is now an important node in the network, connecting 3 corridors. And for the Baltic Sea, I think it's important. It's one of the main nodes of a strategic ring formed by the Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor and the North Sea Baltic corridor around the Baltic Sea, the strategic transport ring. And I think what's also new is that there are coordinators on that have the ability to coordinate the federal states a little bit. And from my point of view, we achieved a well-balanced network, and we achieved a lot of options for regional growth provided by EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, provided also by the cooperation program of the Baltic Sea region, and by the CEF, by the Connecting Europe facility, as mentioned today, tomorrow at the morning by Pavel Telička. And I think I clearly speak about options and not about realities, because these are options, and we have to fill them with life to generate regional development. And I hope our discussion will bring us some steps forward for doing that.
Thank you very much.
May I just say about the reason why we made a change? Sorry for Mr. Palmqvist got stuck in Stockholm this morning due to a delayed flight. So I think that's the reason why we're sitting here in the panel to discuss this interoperability and issues in transport. So he was very sorry and sends his regards to everyone. Thank you. Radek.
Good morning. Good morning. Not to stress Wiktor more, I will be short. I represent the Pomorskie region. I represent Pomorskie region, which is the northernmost Polish region on the Baltic Sea. In my day-to-day duties, I'm working on strategic planning and regional programming, including also Objective 1 programs, but also ETC programs. As far as transport is concerned, I'm to some extent responsible for what is going to happen in Baltic-Adriatic corridor in my region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's consider you, the panelists, as a group of stakeholders who come with different interests, different priorities. There might be some conflicts between you that wouldn't like to be on the scene, of course, but theoretically there might be some conflicts of interests. Some of you are located on the corridors, deal with the corridor policies. Some just would like to connect to the corridors. So how to do it in the best way? I think we'll start with James to give us the perspective, what's going to happen in the foreseeable future with the TEN-T core network corridor policy. So James, I know you have slides. Now I'd like to, yes,
Okay.
please.
Right.
You're most welcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Wiktor. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure to be back in Turku again. I was first here 20 years ago when I was part of the team involved in the negotiations for the accession of Finland to the European Union. So it's always a pleasure to be in Turku, and it's a pleasure again today. Now, the subject in hand, to turn on the slides, Wiktor, the green button, I suppose.
I think I would suggest, yes,
Right, okay.
take the green button.
Now, as we say in English, there's nothing new under the sun, and indeed there isn't, because in 1358, the Hanseatic League had already set up the TEN-T corridor network, including logistic hubs and intermodal terminals, and it looked a bit like this. Here were the states. As you can see, they were coastal regions. You had Kurland, modern Latvia, and intense activity along the Hanseatic League cities, where we have colleagues representing here, Gdansk, along the German Baltic coast. Denmark didn't seem to feature terribly much, and the islands of Sweden seemed to control most of the western Baltic traffic. But it existed, they made a lot of money, they were one of the wealthiest trading operations in medieval Europe. The trade flows were interesting. It was basically motorways of the sea. Why? Because there weren't any roads, really. So you would have traffic from Novgorod, Riga, Visby, etc. So already the Baltic was being used as an incredibly diverse trading operation. Okay, now I find slide presentations incredibly boring, so I'm going to bang through the rest very fast. You can always pick them up on the website if you want to refer back. There are a lot of numbers for which I apologize. Okay, let's go. So, the 9 core network corridors. Maps are important. It looks like the London Tube map, but it isn't. It's our map. And I'm afraid it's not really big enough, but you can see if you want to go from north to south, to east to west, you've more or less got one of our systems operating for you. This is the system as we see it today, and as we hope it will be completed with the money, the 23.6 billion that Pavel Telichka mentioned this morning, by the year 2030. The network should be established. The 9 core network corridors, supported by 2 horizontal policy measures, very important for the Baltic Sea, motorways of the sea, and the second is the ERTMS signaling system for modern European 1435 gauge railway networks. Now, so, the Baltic Sea region will be served by 4 of these 9 corridors. The North Sea Baltic, the one that I work on, Malla Paajanen is also working on, Pavel is the coordinator, Helsinki, Tallinn to the North Sea ports. Second, Scandinavian, have I spelled that right? No, I haven't. Sorry about that. Scandinavian Mediterranean corridor, which actually goes all the way to, starting off well, I need to go back, sorry. Starting off in Malta, as you can see, those dotted lines are the motorways of the sea connections, going straight up the center of Europe, Italy, across Central Europe, the Fehmarn Belt, and importantly for the Baltic Sea region, a branch from southern Sweden, one going to Oslo, and the other going up to Stockholm, motorways of the sea across to Turku, Turku to Kotka, and the Russian border. Baltic Adriatic, Gdansk to Ravenna, and then finally the Orient East Med, Bremen-Hamburg to Nicosia, again, a motorways of the sea connection. Okay, so this is the macro, the more mid view of the Baltic Sea. As you can see, the 2 main corridors are the red one, North Sea Baltic, and the pink one, Scan-Med. But we've also got the other 2, the brown, which is the Orient East Med, coming into the German ports in the bottom left-hand corner, southwestern corner, and then you can see the Baltic Adriatic, the blue one. The coordinator for the ScanMed, which is of most importance probably to you apart from our operations on the eastern seaboard, is Mr. Pat Cox, distinguished former president of the European Parliament. And for the other two, the brown Orient East Med is a former member of the European Parliament, Mr. Mathias, who is a German-speaking Belgian, and the blue one, the Baltic Adriatic, is Mr. Bodvig, former German federal transport minister. Okay, that's an even more micro-regional shot. I call Helsinki crossing the T because you've got the North Sea Baltic coming up from the south and you've got the ScanMed crossing over. I know this upset my colleague and friend, Mr. Oddgeir Danielsen, who said he would prefer it if it was a, what was it, Oddgeir? An X or a Y, going north, of course. So we mustn't limit our vision. This was mentioned in this morning's presentation. We have to bear in mind what's happening in the northern dimension, the melting of the Arctic ice, the chance of major traffic flows coming through, across the top of Europe, and we are aware of that. Of course, these are the core network corridors, but there is also the core network which is not part of the corridors, and in Finland, from Helsinki going north round the Gulf of Bothnia is part of the core network, but not a corridor. So it doesn't have the same cross-border importance that we put on the corridors themselves. Okay, now here you go. Standard regulation, we want standards on the core network, we want ERTMS, electrification, why? Sustainable, environmental reasons, freight lines, axle load, train length, inland waterways class 4, alternative clean fuels for ports. Implementation tools, coordinators, as I've just told you, and core network corridors. Support the implementation, multimodal, involving at least 3 member states. These are the definitions. Flexible governance, which I'm sure Malla will talk about. Involvement of stakeholders. Again, Wiktor is the great expert here. Coordinators for the ERTMS and motorways of the sea. We have 2 coordinators for those 2 horizontal policies. Okay, how you make a corridor? You nominate the coordinators. Well, we have all 9 in place, or we did have up to Pavel's election to the European Parliament. He will be resigning, unfortunately, at the beginning of July and will be replaced. The other 2 have to finalize the procedure, but by November we should have the 9 corridors. The current work, the analysis of the corridor is going on. We're coming up to the 2nd corridor forum for all 9 corridors, which will be in 2 weeks' time in Brussels. The consultants, the 9 consultant teams working on each corridor will be drawing up a work plan. It'll be approved by the member states, finally implementing decision in 2015. Connecting Europe facility, I'm sure you're all interested in the money, we all are. Okay, so 26.25 billion for the 10T, this was the total, as opposed to 8 billion only in 2007-2013. I think this indicates that the member states, with the reduction in agricultural spending, have realized the importance of transport. It is cross-border, it brings the single market closer together, it's important, so they gave it a lot more money, and for which Vice President Kallas should be congratulated because he had to do all the negotiations to get the money. 11.3 billion under the new pricing for member states eligible for the Cohesion Fund, that's the new member states. 14.9 billion for all 28. This is a competitive procedure. Every state can put in. It has to fulfill certain requirements. Cross-border, bottlenecks, involving as many member states as possible, etc., etc. Okay, so those are the more detailed funding rates, 50% for studies, 85% for the new states, 25 and less. You can look that up for yourself when you're dealing and applying for project financing. And I should stress at this point, before I forget, we're not just talking about infrastructure building here, we're talking about anything which can make the corridor work better. And that's where stakeholder groups come in and are very important. So we could be talking between the 3.6 billion as should be allocated to building the Rail Baltic railway, but we're also talking about 3 or 4 million for stakeholder group activities attempting to focus the interests of stakeholders, regions, cities, universities, environmental groups, you name it. Everybody has a place in the forum, but unfortunately we don't have a meeting room for 1,000 people for each corridor, so everything will have to be channeled through different levels of stakeholders, and that's why we're very interested in stakeholder projects. Financial instruments, very boring. You can read it yourselves. Priorities, again, read it yourselves. I'm sure you'll have fun doing that. The contractors need to provide technical assistance, logistical support to Pavel and me and our team. Their task is to fact-find, prepare the work plan, define the corridor. We have this 10-tech system where it's all mapped on charts, so we know exactly where all the lines go. Remember, it's multimodal. It's rail, it's road, it's motorways of the sea, short sea shipping, it's core network ports, core network airports, the whole thing. Scandinavian Mediterranean, it's Combi Consortium, North Sea Baltic, it's Proximare, the project manager is Malla over there. The work plan will have to be set up towards the end of the year. I'm sure she'll talk about that. There's the content of the work plan, infrastructure investments, measures to remove physical, technical, operational, administrative barriers. The corridor has to get a life. It has to be branded. People have to know what it is. Freight forwarders, shippers, governments, people, individuals have to know that they can go along this corridor and it will be easier than it was in the past. That's what the money is there for. There's Pat Cox. There's Pavel. The finance, the border. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James, for casting a light on the matter of how 10T core network corridors will be implemented. I actually can't resist asking you an immediate question.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the slides of these bottom-up cooperation structures.
Yep.
That we can put on the screen perhaps again, the intro slide
Yep.
here.
Yep.
The question to you is, I think you said to me before the meeting, and I think the slide is just coming in,
Yep.
that you were really impressed and you didn't know many of these different stakeholder cooperation structures.
Right.
What's your opinion? What's the added value of the concept that you've just presented? Is it disturbing to a certain extent? Is it helping? Is it synergizing? What's your views on that? How would you say about the added value?
Okay, well, Pavel in his presentation this morning mentioned the fact that the EU is not well looked upon at the moment across many countries. Which is partly our fault and partly time passing, and the whole objective of the EU to stop wars has largely been forgotten, its greatest ever success. When this new policy was designed, it was made very clear by DG Move, the commissioner, the vice president, that if it was going to work, it had to have a bottom-up support. We're always being criticized, particularly in my country. We are bossy, we dictate policy, it's top-down, we don't care about people, we're just a machine, we're useless bureaucrats who, just shove out regulations all over the place. The consultation for the new policy was huge. Every single state group we had, this continued over about a two and a half year period. Several of the 10T days, our annual conference, was devoted to it. Now, I'm grateful to you, Wiktor, because I think one of the things that I would most like to see coming out of a week's meeting like this is a glossary of all the Baltic Sea cooperation structures, because I get awfully confused. And this slide was extremely helpful to me. I know some of them, but I didn't know all of them. Now, they're not a threat, Wiktor, to answer your question. They're an asset. And I think it's our job to incorporate them as much as possible. Obviously, we're talking of geography here, so where you can see on the slides the arrows are defined along certain areas, if these don't correspond to our corridors, then of course they're interesting, they serve another purpose, we're not against them, but they can't be directly involved in the development of our corridor. The one here, which of course was when I first became aware of stakeholder involvement along our corridor, was the Rail Baltica Growth Corridor, which was an initiative taken by Helsinki and Berlin. Horst Sauer was very much part of it. The cities, not necessarily the ministries, decided that they should set up this organization, which resulted in a very successful train trip from Berlin along the whole route to Kaunas, a route which is just hasn't been used for international train travel for many decades. and showing what it really meant to have a corridor. So that one is directly applicable. What we have to do on the North Sea Baltic now is to extend it from Berlin west to the North Sea ports. But there are already stakeholder groups on the Dutch-German border, Euregio 2, and so on. The other ones, as you can see, some of them will be interesting to my colleagues on other corridors, the north-south ones. The mid-Scandic one doesn't correspond with to a corridor. But the principle, to answer your question, is we are very much in favor of having this sort of organization because, as I'm sure Malla will explain, the forum starts off with the member states. That's the first level. The second level is the infrastructure managers. The third level is the cities and regions. And the fourth level is other stakeholders, environmental groups, interest groups, NGOs, whatever. I mean, you'd end up with such a vast, effective parliament of each of these corridors that it would be unmanageable. So we rely on these organizations to represent many other people underneath. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The corridor parliaments, I think this is very illustrative, what you just said, that there is a multitude of different organizations, communities, groups that within the specific corridor must be contacted, must be involved in the decision-making process. This is what we say the multi-level governance is about. The other panelists, do you have immediate reaction to James Pond's intervention? Matthias, please.
Yes, I might offer. We were pondering about this question or this approach quite a lot in discussion prior to this event, and very much welcome your words, James, and the willingness. We have been part in our region. We have taken part in several of these corridor approaches, and especially we have gained, let's say, cutting-edge knowledge and experience on stakeholder management issues in corridors. So we really welcome cooperation on this matter. Also, let's say, not only in the corridor discussions themselves, but also in the thematic stakeholder management process and the governance process. The other thing that I would like to consider is also the role of you said that that if you're not situated along the corridors, if these initiatives are not coinciding with the corridors, then they can't have a role, or they are not part of the, let's say, formal process. But then we end up with core network tunnels, not perhaps considering very important gateway transit areas in and out of the corridors, catchment areas, and so on. And I completely agree that we can't have this as a kind of a huge democratic parliament with everybody would have a thing, but perhaps this is more, let's say, directed to the national level, that somehow see that the national level has to bear kind of a filtering role in this also. I think that would be very beneficial, so that we could within the countries look at the mechanism of how to absorb these experiences from these and then relaying them into the corridor works.
Jon, please.
Yes, is this on? Okay. It's not on, right?
Yes, no.
Yes, it's on.
Okay, so I agree very much with what you are saying about these corridor cooperation structures. They are very important, and they fulfill a very important aspect in improving integration in the transport systems. What is often missing, as I see it, is the national level. They are not really involved in these cooperation structures as they should be. And I think we as infrastructure managers, we actually need these sort of cooperation structures because they can provide something that we are normally not very good at, and which is to find the sort of the interface between transportation and other policy areas with the local and regional perspectives and so on. So I hope that we will see more of national involvement in these structures in the future. But that's sort of, for that to happen, it has to come from both ways. There has to be, they had to be set up in a way that make it possible for the national level and the infrastructure managers to be part in them. Yeah. That's a very important point I would like to make.
Absolutely. Horst and then Malla.
I want to add some words, Jan. Because, well, on the one side, we had the 10T revision process. On the other side, we had the approach of the regions. And sometimes I had the feeling that we had the federal states, the member states, as in a sandwich position between commission and region. Well, and I think that was not very comfortable for the member states doing that. But now I think the most of them agreed to the coordinators. There was a time where they didn't agree to that, but the regions pushed and also the Commission pushed, and that was the common sense at one point. And so I think there started a strong cooperation between regions and a TEN-T network and TEN-T policy. And I think it was something, this discussion was something like a breakthrough, because before the process, I think we had a TEN-T community. And at every TEN-T days, you had the same guys talking about TEN-T, which talked about TEN-T since several years. And on the other side, you had this Interreg community, also nice guys. They are talking always about Interreg and regional interests and something like that, but they didn't come together. And now you have this perfect situation of, I think it's nearly perfect, the chance, this option in Article, I think, 50 of TEN-T regulations, dealing with cross-funding, not cross-funding, but funding and cooperation of different funding sources and working together. And I think that's also a great step forward. And I think also this idea was born because of the discussions between regions and the commissions regarding TEN-T revision. That's my impression at this point. And so I think it fits, well, not all these corridors fit to the core network corridors, but the intention behind that fits completely to that what the Commission is doing at this point. And I hope that the member states are going on to agree on that and doing something in direction of coordination transport politics about cross-border politics.
Thank you. Malla.
Thank you. Yes, like James pointed out, the corridor study in 2014, this is pretty much the first exercise in which we build and test the cooperation format between the member states and all the different stakeholders. And we have to remember that when we talk about the TEN-T strategy implementation, the decision makers are the member states, together with the Commission. So the national perspective is, by definition, there, persistently. And so in a way, that is the top-down perspective of the process. And at the same time, the regulation welcomes the input from all the other stakeholders, like we mentioned, the infrastructure managers, cities and regions, civil society, and so forth. So this is the first time when we are really combining de facto these two perspectives, top-down and bottom-up. And in 2014, it really is an exercise. There is no manuscript, which well, surely there are guidelines, but there's no precise manuscript how we are going to do it in a way that it works, because the stakeholder groups are numerous and they are large. There's the management administration kind of a problem related to that. And at the same time, we need the input, because without this rich bottom-up perspective, we lose in richness considerably. So in a way, the practical challenge is how to make sure that all the important voices from the stakeholders are taken into account in the corridor study process, but at the same time, it's manageable. And when I meet different stakeholder groups, I tend to underline the fact that it is not about who sits in the meeting room when we have the corridor forum meeting. That's not relevant, because that's basically just the meeting in which all the opinions and voices that have been documented are just approved and taken officially to the next phase. The real thing takes place in the cooperation itself. In these groups, as shown here, and in others, Rail Baltica Growth Corridor, in which I was heavily involved together with City of Helsinki and the other partners, we developed, or actually the whole project was about stakeholder cooperation, and we made an effort to document that process, which is definitely one guideline which we are using now in the corridor study. It's only one of them, and it will be tested and it will be worked on. So in a way, what we will have at the end of 2014 is a model and its first tested version. And then we have to keep our minds open and be able to question the work that we have done in order to make it more and more fluent.
Thank you. Radek, please.
Yes, I have quick response to what was said by James. It's a warning message, but constructive at the same time, I hope. Well, you mentioned that top-down, bottom-up approach, is needed to some extent. And what at least I can observe from the corridor forums is that there is no bottom-up approach at the corridor forum. So what is missing there? The missing thing is the context of the corridor, local context, regional context, economic context of the corridor. We have some guys discussing about transport flows, and we don't have too many guys discussing about the real economic change which should be done based on the corridors. So what is missing, at least at this stage, maybe it will change. At this stage, a bottom-up approach is missing, which means that economic, local, regional context is missing. And it's easy to take not very well decisions without economic context. So that's why I would like to respond to this, to your bottom-up question or bottom-up idea.
Before you reply, James, I think that Oddgeir also wanted to take a stand.
Thank you, Wiktor. I will only spend 20 minutes, so then there will be no more time left for the question to be answered. No, I just wanted to comment that as James was presenting here, you showed some very interesting picture from the trade flows from Novgorod in, I think it was 1538.
1358.
Even earlier, 1358. and that's interesting. And then came the corridor networks. I'm very much in favor of the corridor thinking, of course, and it's not that, but then it strikes me that what we have today is exactly what we had in 1358. Has nothing been changing since then? And that's also when it comes to me this, that you were also commenting Helsinki in the top of the T. I think we need to look a little bit bigger when we are looking for planning for the transport infrastructure for the future, and not only going back to 1358. And that's also some of the role when NPTL are going to play in the future. When it comes to all these initiatives that is popping around, they need to be there. They are extremely important. I don't believe that the national level need to be engaged directly in the project, because that will definitely limit their freedom to do whatever they want. But the national level should probably be much better listening to and adapting the good things and extracting the good things from this corridor project that is around. And we should also remember when the Commission is presenting the corridor maps, it's nothing that the Commission has been doing on their own. They have been producing this as well as all the other maps in dialogue with all the national authorities. And they have agreed, and they have had dialogues with regional and local national initiatives as well. And that's when we are getting this multi-level governance, and everybody is speaking to each other, but we need to follow the rules of procedure when we are speaking and promoting our initiatives. Thank you.
That's right. James, your answer before we move on to the next question, please.
Yeah, very briefly, to answer our Polish colleague's point. You're right. The Corridor Forum 1 was just the EU and the member states. It's Corridor Forum 2 will be the EU, the member states, and the infrastructure managers. Corridor 3 will be all of the above and the regions and cities and so on. The only problem with this is that we are obliged in the EU working methodology to pass this through the member states. So the selection of the representatives of these stakeholder groups, the third and the fourth, is determinant on whether the member state approves the list. So I think it's a little unfair to say that the Corridor Forum hasn't taken on board this. It's too early in the process. As to how wide the stakeholder consultation will be, this will depend on the attitude of the member states towards their own national stakeholder groups.
Thank you very much. If we can move on to the second question, I have also a background slides for all of you to consider. And we'll see the slides soon popping up on the screen. We have also a very good heritage of strategic working in the Baltic Sea area with a number of concepts, so-called strategic networks. There is an exercise in the so-called Baltic Transport Outlook study that presented or projected a future strategic transport network, bearing in mind the questions of sustainable growth, territorial cohesion, etc. We have also bottom-up initiatives of a number of us being active in transnational Interreg projects with a network of multimodal green transport corridors. And also we have something I would like to address Oddgeir with, NDTPL regional network. This is an important intergovernmental result of intergovernmental work to create certain visionary network for rail and road infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, or the northern dimension area that includes also the Baltic Sea region. How you see a possibility to put them together on one map? Because I think this is also a matter of how we understand the multi-level governance and the result of multi-level governance process, with different groups of stakeholders being responsible for these results you can see here on the screen. So, Oddgeir, if you would like to comment on this, please.
I can do that. Unfortunately, the picture that you have shown us now on the NDPTL regional network is the rail network. And that is, of course, the one that doesn't have 100% coverage because it doesn't have so much rail in the northern areas.
Yes.
But you were also speaking about putting all these networks together and making one map. And frankly speaking, I don't see that that should be actually a good solution, because then we are losing the opportunity of getting input from other sources. If you look into the NDPTL networks, that is a blue copy of the 10T networks, core and comprehensive. But in addition to that, we have connections to the countries around. We will probably never put some lines into the NDPTL network that is not in conformity with the 10T network. And the 10T is approved by all EU member states and coordinated in a good way. And what we are doing in NDPL is actually coordinate this with the neighboring countries in a supranational structure. And again, this demonstrates the bottom-to-top approach in this way of working, that we are also getting input via the national authorities to how these maps are going to look like. It's a long process behind defining them, especially when it comes to the outside connections. And they are approved within the European Union, and they are also approved by the national authorities in the outside countries. So I think we should stick to these maps, as many as possible, more or less, as long as we could agree which one are the ruling ones. And normally that is the ones who are defining where to get funding. Thank you.
Jon, a question for you then. Sweden has been quite active in promoting the Baltic Transport Outlook study, as gave one of these specific patterns, one of these specific setup that we can see on the screen. Do you see a future for this process? How to integrate this sort of a strategic thinking where a number of national networks that we put together on one map, which is the BTO strategic network, that also includes the network in the remote areas in the north, for instance, which are not part of the 10T network corridors. What's your impression on that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question, but I think what's important is that we now have a 10T network, both a comprehensive network, we have a core network, we have certain priority corridors, which we have agreed upon. I think that is the important thing, that we are kind of working with them and with the structures that they are, which are established within that framework. And there can be a number of other maps showing possible connections and so on and so forth in relation to the 10T corridor network. But I'm not sure it's the most important thing how we draw different arrows on the maps. I think it's more important what is actually happening, what are we actually doing, and with the consumer focus, how do we improve the accessibility for those industries, those people who are actually moving around in the Baltic Sea region, and how do we make this greener, safer, and more secure in the future. So it's good that we are drawing maps, but we shouldn't dig too much into it, I think.
All right. Myself, I'm a geographer, as you know, so I like maps very much, and I think there are also some spatial planners sitting here in the audience that also like maps. But if I can tease the panel a little bit more, do you think that the location matters? Because we have a number of regions and areas located either on the corridors, We have the matter of Helsinki, Berlin, which might be said they are privileged of being part of the network corridor. We have also Pomorskie region, Radek. And we have also, on the other hand, the regions located far away from the corridors, on between two specific corridors. Should we have different measures for these different categories of the regions and cities? Should we adopt some customized policy? How to connect these areas? If you can share with us your ideas. Who would like to start first? I think Malla was the first one. Yes, you would like to get your slides on the screen.
Yes, actually, if possible, I'd like to have the map from my presentation, just to add to your question and to the earlier discussion. So yes, the location certainly does matter, and more specifically, every map has a story of its own. Because the themes, every map always it's a thematic theme. It can be a geographical map, but there's always information embedded. For instance, the TEN-T, European-wide TEN-T strategy map, it's the map of the TEN-T strategy implementation, the regulation itself. Very often maps are cooperation maps, like the one that was shown of the Rail Baltica growth corridor was a map developed of the project partnership and so forth. And the map I want to show from here is this. So if we think back to the TEN-T map in which there was the red line from Helsinki down to the Netherlands, the North Sea, Baltic. So that's the strategic map, the future that we want to see, a harmonious, multimodal, well-connected, modern European transport corridor. This is the reality today. And the maps look strikingly different. And, well, my message being that we need to work from the situation where we are now, and we need to work from the basis how things are. And this map actually strikingly underlines the importance of the corridor perspective, because the location does matter. I come from Helsinki, so from the Helsinki point of view, we would have a certain idea what are the priorities to develop along the corridor. But those opinions seen against this map would show immediately that the most urgent needs are elsewhere. So the red part of the map really points out the parts in which there are still serious lacks before all the European standards are achieved. Orange is somewhere intermediate, and the green is basically okay, mostly capacity bottlenecks. So, because in the TEN-T strategy, first and foremost, we keep the corridor perspective. Why? Because that's the only way to ever reach the shared, let's put it the other way around. We have to start with those things that are most desperately seeking for improvements and attention. So we have to start with the red parts and the orange parts. Okay, at the same time, of course, we're not idle as to everything else, but, and of course, the member states and the projects and all that, there are advancements, but when we talk about prioritizing, and prioritizing also from the funding point of view, we have to keep the corridor perspective, otherwise the bottlenecks simply won't be removed. We have to prioritize for the bottlenecks. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Anyone else to present? Mathias, please.
Yes, I think this would be a good moment also to show the couple of slides that I have with me. So yes, this shows I've hijacked the TEN-T map and put my own lines into this. But this is just to show our perspective on the location. We have of course, the two ferry lines, which also coincide with the two completed motorways of the sea project, Karlshamn-Klaipeda and Karlskrona-Gdynia. And then we have the dotted line, which are the existing railway connections to the intermodal terminals in the ports, and we have the Blekinge region in the background. But if I start, let's say, with the location issue, now coming back also to my earlier remark about this, the transit and the connections between the core network corridors, I can also touch a bit upon about the comment earlier about the local and regional context, because I think that the let's say we consider these two very successful ferry lines. Karlshamn-Klaipeda has in the last decade grown by over 70%, and last year Karlskrona-Gdynia again grew by over 18%. So it has been a huge development on these ferry lines connecting what is now the core ports in Klaipeda and Gdynia with the comprehensive ports we have in Blekinge. But my point is that even though that we are situated, let's say, far from, or not on the corridor, we have a really big function to fill, and there are other regions that are equally crucial. For example, if you consider the Nordic Triangle, we have a line that ends in Örebro, and we definitely have very, very important functional connections between Örebro and Gothenburg, and also Örebro towards Oslo. But the completed successful motorways of the sea projects have proved to be what I would definitely, I'm not ashamed to say that's the best, that's the thing that we should strive for when working with the core network corridors. This cooperation that has been going on between the Commission, the member states, together also the member states both on the ministry level but also in the infrastructure level, with the regional and the local context, and including the business perspective, has been a very, very, very good method of working. So perhaps there's something that we could definitely learn in the larger context of the core network corridors when it comes to from the completed motorways of the sea projects. The other thing about the location that I would like to raise in this thing is the use of financing. We heard earlier about the cohesion countries being able to use structural funds also for infrastructure investments. We are a small county in a country that's not, of course, considered a cohesion country, and we are not able to use structural funds for infrastructure investments. We are also excluded, let's say, from the bulk of Connecting Europe facility through the not being in the core network corridor. And I think that it would be quite. I'll go back. And one more. The blue lines in this is illustrating the actual motorways of the sea projects in the Baltic Sea region that have been completed or are ongoing. And you said earlier, James, that the dotted lines in the corridors are motorways of the sea project. But equally, we think that the other motorways of the sea, let's say, connections should be somehow integrated into the spirit of the core network corridors, because they provide these very important functional lines in order to complete the picture in the Baltic Sea region. So basically, two points. Again, learn from the cooperation processes there. The location is important, that there's a lot of things that have been done and can be done even outside the core network corridors in order to for the joint benefit and also to enhance the function and the efficiency in the corridors themselves.
Thank you. James, you would like to have immediate reply.
Just very briefly to answer your point, you're absolutely right. As the original slide from the Middle Ages showed, the Baltic Sea depends on shipping to such a great extent. The dotted line just shows the continuation of the corridor, but any core network port can be linked in the motorways of the sea. It's a crucial policy for the Baltic Sea region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Horst.
Could you please?
Yes, we'll take Horst Sauer slides right now. I have a lot of slides and illustrations.
As spatial planner, I always need
yes.
some plans, some slides.
Yes.
Now let's. What?
Green buttons.
Well, I got it. Yeah, and well, I only looked for these slides because on the one side there's a spatial perspective on the Baltic Sea. It's a long-time perspective of the WASAP. And on the other side, I also hijacked the core network. I didn't hijack, you ever can use it, but I added some dots, and this is the urban nodes of the 10T core network. There are some mistakes on the map, but you see it if you add the urban maps. But what I think what's interesting is that they look a little bit similar, because there are some difference because of other points of view, but I think this combination highlights that location and a place-based approach surely matters. And I think it's especially for urban nodes like Berlin, because they are the key links between transport and regional development. And I think they also need a special communication structure, because they have a special responsibility for connecting several corridors and connecting the regions, also more distant regions, directly to the core network. Because if you look at Berlin-Brandenburg, we have this transport association covering a lot more of space than Blekinge, and adding it to the core network corridor, and we have a logistic there. Well, regions in Germany are, despite of not being competent for larger infrastructures like motorways or rail, they have a strong responsibility for organizing the transport flows on the ground. And urban nodes have to handle the conflicts between global, European, regional, and local transport flows regarding passenger and freight transport. And they have the most problem between transport cost pollution and the inhabitants of the cities, because that's obvious. And from this point of view, I think they are the place for diminishing it. And multi-level communication is crucial, therefore. Oops, das wollte ich nicht. Yeah, and on the other hand, they are the hotspots. They are already the hotspots for alternative fuels. If you look to e-mobility and something like that, it happens in the cities, and the holes between that have to be filled. And so, if you combine it, you have these alternative fuels, fuel distribution. You have innovative technologies, new logistic and last mile concepts. And a place-based approach is, from my point of view, crucial for the involvement of regions and private stakeholders, as you already mentioned, especially small and medium enterprises, as asked for. And you could be assured that these small and medium enterprises are not willing to do this and to go to the process if you can show them a clear regional added value for themselves. And so you have to come to the ground. Therefore, my recommendation is that there should be urban corridor node working groups, in addition to the possible cross-border working groups along the TEN-T corridor, in this case along the Scandinavian Adriatic, because we are working with that. We are going to provide this opportunity along the Scandria corridor with new Interact projects in the next subsidy period, but we have to look how to combine it with the TEN-T coordinators. And for my region, the capital region, Berlin-Brandenburg, we are hardly working on building up communication structures in the region between logistic and networks and other real existing networks, and to combine them with the TEN-T corridor coordinators, maybe as a working group. And my vision is at this point, a chain of place-based cooperation poles along the Scandria corridor and also along others for greening the whole corridor network. Because the one thing is the corridor as a whole, and you surely have to think of that. The other thing is how to come to the ground and how to take the ground into the discussion. And there should be something like these working groups and poles along the corridor. Well, I mentioned as poles, and I think that could be very, very interesting also for long-time communication between Commission and the regions.
Thank you very much. Finally, Radek,
Yeah.
you also have just one slide, I heard.
Yeah. Yes, I have one slide, even though I'm not...
And we are moving eastward right now
Yes.
to the capital city of Gdansk.
Yeah, even though I am not geographer, and even though I'm not a special planner, I like maps because I'm an engineer. But to answer to your question, for us the place has always and will always matter. There is no doubt about it. I have some examples from the past, but I will try to use only one, especially for today. So the place was important for us during Cold War, when Tri-City, meaning Gdańsk, Gdynia, Sopot, turned out to be a main gateway to Poland and some other former communist countries. A gateway not only able to import or export goods, but a gateway also able to import freedom and democracy to Central and Eastern Europe. By the way, today we are celebrating 25th anniversary of regaining freedom in this part of Europe, especially in Poland. So the place really matters for us, especially when you are located at the intersection of former Amber route, called now Baltic-Adriatic Corridor, and Via Hanseatica Corridor, integrating all seaports along South Baltic. But to be clear, we have almost perfect location on TEN-T core network and TEN-T comprehensive network, and this is not a marketing story. This is produced by an Interreg project. This is a hard economic reality. But a good location on TEN-T network is neither recipe nor guarantee for success, I would say. We can transform this into success provided that at least 4 conditions are met, and I would like to put them based on Baltic-Adriatic corridor. Firstly, our understanding of Baltic-Adriatic corridor on the national level should go far beyond a pure transport link. Instead, we should see it rather as a key development zone and area of hopefully dynamic socio-economic growth, which relies, among others, on good and efficient transport connections, including infrastructure and services. Secondly, on the transnational level, we should presume that Baltic-Adriatic corridor is going to play a very important role as one of the drivers of economic development, economic change in Central Europe. And the area between Baltic and Adriatic has at least 2 important features. These are quite big regional disparities in terms of economic development on one hand, and strong development dynamics of weaker regions on the other hand. And those 2 factors are decisive to growing transport flows on north-south axis, which are of vital importance for competitiveness and for coherence of this area. We all know that industrial heart or industrial center of Europe is moving eastwards, and we should address this somehow when we are discussing TEN-T network here. Thirdly, it is very important, some of you have already mentioned this, that corridor is efficiently connected with the other transport corridors to avoid pure tunnel effects, and should be also well integrated into regional transport network and regional economic context again, and specificity. So this is the third condition, and the last condition, it is also a repetition to some extent, I assume, but we should remember about an open dialogue between public and private actors. And this dialogue could be mutually beneficial and add a real value to the policy, public policy in the area of transport. Without this, it would be hardly possible, for example, to partially reshift or shift transport flows from the North Sea to the Baltic Sea, which is now the case, also thanks to Baltic-Adriatic corridor. So those were 4 conditions.
Thank you very much. Oddgeir, if I can just address you again with one very direct question. You have been a person coming from the high north yourself, Kirkenes, north of Norway. Do you see any perspectives for your area, the northern part of Europe, or the top of Europe, to reap benefits of the TEN-T core network corridors? By functional connections, by any other means? Have you had any sort of a reflection on that? How to make use of this very beautiful concept presented by James?
Yes.
Good.
I could, of course, comment on that. But I would like to have some slides on the screen, because I need to show you some maps also.
Yes. Oddgeir slides, please.
And the point here wouldn't be what the High North could benefit from the TEN-T, but rather the opposite. What the TEN-T and Europe could benefit from the activities that are in the High North. Just to tell you a little bit about the Northern Dimension, because I'm obliged to do that as well. The Northern Dimension is, it's a policy cooperation between 4 equal partners, and I underline equal partners. It's Russia, it's Iceland, it's Norway, and it's the European Union. When we are speaking about policy cooperation, we are coordinating initiatives of common interest. And that's the point. Within this cooperation for us, there are 4 different pillars or the implementation tools, and that's the partnerships. I'm not going to go into details about this, but the Northern Dimension Partnership on Transport and Logistics is the partnership I'm representing, and we are implementing the policies and the projects that are being done. You couldn't implement without providing funding, so funding is also a key element when it comes to this. That was the background. And then I could address your question.
Please.
If you look into the 10T networks, I'm not showing you the corridor network, I'm showing you the 10T core network, as it is for today. It's a little bit more than the T in Helsinki, but still, if we know what is actually happening around us in the north, in the Arctic, and all the possibilities, all the mineral resources that we find in the north, all the fish resources, the energy, the underwater mining, everything that is needed to probably bring Europe out of recession. It's there. But still we are only focusing on what we can do in Central Europe when we are planning for the transport infrastructure. So I think that it is extremely important also for everybody planning for the infrastructure down here that we are looking what is happening around us. Because even things happening outside this island, which is the Baltic Sea, will, whether we want it or not, have an influence on our everyday lives around here. We could see it as a threat, or we could see it as an opportunity. And most of you will probably say that, no, it's far away, it's not of our concern, and we would like to sit here comfortably and do what we have been doing since 1358. I think that will be a huge mistake, because in today's world we are moving extremely fast. Only less than half a year ago, the world looked totally differently than it does today. And we need to be able to adapt to that if we are going to have some positive effect out of that in the future. The map you are looking at now, it's not the best possible map that you could see from transport and logistic perspectives. Everybody knows that this is a political compromise. And the political compromise comes for the fact that if you are on this map, you could have some funding allocated, and that's why everybody here is trying to get on the maps, because then you have some funding opportunities. Let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, that's what it's all about. And then to NDPTL, because if you look into the NDPTL network, which is actually based on the 10T networks, it's coordinated on a national level, on a supranational level. It also comes with some funding for preparing this. We have connections into the Arctic regions, even though they are not as good as they should have been. We have connections that might be developed to bring Europe new activity, new markets, new shipping lines, like, for instance, the Northern Sea route, which we might choose to leave for the Russians and the Chinese and have no effect out of it, or we could prepare for building the Baltic Sea, as I've said earlier, as the mother of all hubs, looking and building connections with the outside world, and especially also in the Arctic. Was that enough for you, Wiktor?
Yes, absolutely enough.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen in the panel, I have one more exercise for you. And I need a background slide on the next question. We made an exercise presenting, don't bother with the figures. Figures are not important. What is important is that we try to screen the national transport plans and programs, putting investments on the map in the context of how they are located on the core network corridors. Plus, we also added the future investments supported from the NDTPL support fund. And we see that there is apparently certain problem that a lot of national transport programs and plans are not accommodating the 10T core network corridor policy in an adequate manner. So there is a challenge for, I think, you, James, also, and your colleagues in the Commission, how to persuade the national governments towards streamlining and aligning their plans to the Commission plans. We mentioned the critical role of the national authorities, the national level. Is there any means to persuade them, motivate for a better coordination across the borders? In the Baltic Sea region, can the 10T policy or core network corridors be an instrument for that? If you can share some opinions on that with us, please. and also then later on, Húlten.
Well, yes, Wiktor, you've touched on a very important point, but I think the answer is fairly simple. Money talks. The TEN-T money will only be spent on the TEN-T network as defined and agreed with the member states. If the member states, and we have had cases, quite recently we've had a case, where the National Transport Plan does not coincide with the policy, but if projects are brought to bear which is not on the structure plan that we have for the TEN-T network, the projects will not be accepted. Member states, of course, are sovereign states. They can build what they like, where they like in their own sovereign territory. But if they want EU financing, then they have to incorporate our planning in their national transport development plans.
Very simple. John, why I'm asking you is that we notice one particular deficiency. On the western branch of the Skandmed corridor, there are no investments planned by the Swedish government across or towards the Norwegian border, from Gothenburg towards Oslo. Do you think it will be possible to revise the plans, upgrade the plans in order to put that critical investment there?
Well, I don't fully agree because there are some investments on the road network, for example, but I agree when it comes to the railway. But these plans are changing all the time, so okay. I wouldn't say that they are fixed forever. I mean, we are in Sweden at least. We do long-term planning for the next 12 years. But they are normally changed every 4th year. So there will be different priorities coming in from the political level on what should be prioritized. The TEN-T will be one perspective which is taken care of in the planning, but there are many other perspectives as well that has to be accommodated in the national planning. To some extent, it's about priority from the government, what should be prioritized, but it's also, and one thing I would like to stress here, it's also to some extent about the tools that we use for planning, because that is sort of a structure that we as planners make use of when we do the analysis for what to do, when we engage in dialogue with different stakeholders and so on. Those tools are never neutral. They are always loaded with some sort of values, and they are influencing the outcomes of the planning process. And the tools we use for planning, for national planning, they very much evolved in the 20th century in a very nationalistic framework. Yeah. We should build new roads, we should build new railways, building national networks. That is not exactly the challenge that we are facing today. We are today facing challenges that are more international, more global. We are facing challenges that are less about building new infrastructure, although that is important, but it's more about optimizing the networks that we already have to make them more sustainable, etc. So we're facing different challenges, and we will need new planning tools for that to happen. And that's something I think we all need to think about. What are the tools we actually do use, and what are the perspectives that they sort of imply, what are the solutions that they are coming up with? I think we need new planning tools to see new perspectives. We have tried in Sweden to work with something that we call the 4-stage principle, which means that we never look at the first solution as building new infrastructure. We always look at the solution that how can we influence the transport demand? How can we optimize the transport infrastructure that we already have? And if we can't do anything more with that, then we are looking into building new infrastructure. And I think that is an approach that which is equally important in the TEN-T network. And I'm glad you raised the issue that TEN-T is not only about building new infrastructure. There are much other solutions which could be accommodated within this framework.
Absolutely. I think that we are gradually building a model that James may take home and discuss with the colleagues of bottom-up, top-down, using new tools, global context, socio-economic context. Malla, would you agree with that?
Thank you. Just a couple of quick points to add. It's absolutely correct that money talks, and the member states, I'm sure, are very well aware of the fact that they have to meet the criteria in order to get the safe funding, and they are quite specific projects to which that money is applicable. But at the same time, each member state has obligations to its citizens, And for instance, in Finland, there are long sections of core network existing, which does not belong to the corridor. But surely it's the obligation of the member states to look into those development needs as well. And for instance, Finland being a very big country geographically, so if we only look at the European perspective, all the population would be located in the southern coastline, which would be rather a horrible future. So in order to keep the country populated and to be able to provide citizens with a real opportunity to choose where they want to live in the country, of course the infrastructure has to be maintained. And then secondly, I'd like to point out a topic which has not actually been discussed at all, which is EU in relation to the rest of the world. So we need to be connected to the global transport routes, the Northern Sea route, the whole Arctic connection, and others. Russia, basically on the 10T map, we only have one border crossing point to Russia, and that happens to be in eastern part of Finland. But surely that's not the only actual border crossing point.
Yes, thank you. I might have a proposal. Do we have questions from the audience that you would like to pose to the panelists? Because I would like at the end to give the floor to the panelists for the concluding remarks. So maybe we can use the opportunity a bit later for you. So please, the microphones are available. I think I recognize the face Jean-Marc Venino, the Commission, DG Regio, Macro-Regional Strategist Competence Unit.
Yes, thank you, Wiktor. Well, I'm not going to make complicated something that looks like it's very, very simple. I mean, the process is clear. But I cannot help linking your session to the session that you attended this morning on governance in macro-regional strategies. And I have the feeling that what you were talking about is also located in one of those macro-regions that have become so popular now at EU level. So my question would be very simple. I heard that you are launching a bottom-up process which will bear its fruits, and that you also need, of course, the influence and the role and the decision of countries, of member states themselves. John Húlten said that in the overall process, maybe member states are partners that should also be part of this early phase of the process. And I would like also mention that we have an action plan in the macro-regional strategy for the Baltic Sea region, and one priority of this action plan is about transport and connectivity. And I think everybody here agrees that transport is important in this area. So my question would be, because this action plan covers all what you have talked about, including the connection with all the external links dealt with by Northern Dimension Partnership on Transport and Logistics, covering motorways of the sea, covering all those core networks, corridors, and so on. My question to, well, not each of you, of course, but would be, do you expect anything from the strategy in this area? And my second question would be, if so, because hopefully some of you will say yes, maybe. If so, what would you expect from the strategy? Because you know that we are still, after 5 years into the implementation phase of this strategy, we are still working on how, and the commissioner said it this morning, how can we improve, or how can we give evidence or show evidence of the added value of the strategy? So in your area, what do you expect, if you expect anything? Thank you.
Dear panel, immediate comments on that? Horst.
One very short comment that should be some part of my conclusions, and this is, well, the coordinators have to be coordinated, because that makes life easier. We have the 10T coordinators in the moment, and they have in the transport sector, we have the priority area coordinators in transport, and I don't know how much they already discussed with another. because I think if there is a good combination between the corridor, core network coordinators and the PACs from the strategy, I think the strategy could be more effective and could be more effective in combining the planning approach in the member states. And they have at least a core, a combined core. And then you can discuss what the PACs should do beyond this, what they have to coordinate, what's beyond the core network corridors, the core network at once, and maybe they go to coordinate these relations between other plans. I think that could be one step forward. And on the other side, I think, well, from my point of view as a spatial planner, I think the strategies, the macro-regional strategies, have something what means a spatial view on I say on money, on funding, spatial view on sectoral policies, and they could help to combine these sectoral policies, and it could be very, very interesting to combine innovation and something like that. What's part of the EDF funding with the TEN-T funding. So I also would recommend that there should be not only a discussion like this between the different commissions. They should come together and pick this up, what's mentioned in the Article 50 of the TEN-T regulation, and look how to combine their forces in a better way. I think that's something that could be done on the EU level for supporting the EU Baltic Sea strategy.
Mathias, please.
Yes, I can only agree with Horst that the context of the strategy could be used to reinforce or, let's say, boost this kind of a bottom-up complementarity that we need into this. And that, of course, as you said in the very beginning, that this relies on that the coordinators are coordinated, and also that the ministries are coordinated, because I'm not sure, I don't know about the case definitely, but I'm not sure that it will be the same people coordinating the transport issue within the Baltic Sea region strategy that will be the person or the persons or the function that will be taking part in the core network platform. So a message to you guys to see about that. So I think the Baltic Sea region strategy and the revision of the action plan and let's say could be tailored a bit more to offer this kind of complementarity to the other process. And I think that would make best use of the resources. That would be also be let's say a helpful tool to enhance an active and ongoing dialogue between the stakeholders. So I'm in the same line as Horst.
Yes. Is the line, Jean-Marc, is the line presented by the panelists satisfactory for you? I may add just on my own perspective, my own line, that we see the PA transport as the area where the bottom-up aspirations presented on the first slide may be met and married to the TEN-T perspective and the macro-regional perspective. So there is a right place actually to accommodate it all. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, there is one question there up in the, yes. Again, if you could introduce yourself, because it's quite difficult to see you from the scene.
Yes. I'm sitting in the dark for the moment.
Yes, Jerker, yes.
My name is Jerker Sjögren. I am program manager for Closer. I have been in Gothenburg. I have been involved in these discussions for some years. And now we are coordinating a project named Swiftly Green that will come out with a toolbox for the coordinators and others at the end of next year. I have a concrete question to you, James. We haven't met before. I will shake hands with you afterwards, if possible. Malla had a very interesting map on the North Sea Baltic corridor with 3 different parts, red, yellow, and green. And if you look on this corridor from a helicopter perspective, it should seem recent. It should seems something very natural for all parties, that you should take the red parts of the corridor first and make sure that the entire corridor is coming up to a common standard as soon as possible. But do you see any tools for the moment, any measures to make, for instance, the government in The Hague to give up some of their priorities in order to get the red part of this corridor managed before the parts in Netherlands? How do you obtain such an overall agreement to take the most severe part of the corridor first? Corridor planning versus national planning. How to make it?
Please,
Okay.
James.
Well, thanks very much for the question. I'm sorry I can't quite identify where you are, but by all means, come and see me
In the room.
afterwards, as they say. But that's a very good question. But it all boils down, of course, to the money, because the money is earmarked for the corridor, and it is the job of the consultants on the basis of analysis of all the studies which have ever been written on the corridor, sections of the corridor, the whole corridor, different countries and the rest. Following the meeting of the 4 meetings of the forum with the stakeholders and the governments that we've described, to come up with a work plan with a suggested list of project priorities, which would include soft projects for stakeholders and hard projects for building. Now, to answer your specific question vis-à-vis the Dutch, they will obviously be lobbying for certain projects. It's well known that the Port of Amsterdam for many years now has wanted to rebuild their sea lock, which is of great importance to the Dutch economy. What the Dutch will have to do, however, is to persuade us that this is a benefit not only for Amsterdam and the Netherlands, but also for the corridor. In other words, would an improvement of the sea lock improve freight flows all the way to Tallinn? We have a frightening figure, which has come out in the Rail Freight Corridor number 8 recent transport market study, that of all the cross-border freight which originates in the North Sea port, 90% of it stops before Warsaw, and we've only identified 1 freight train which has crossed the Polish-Lithuanian border. They've identified it. So to take the corridor concept, you have to look at projects that will improve that situation. But I mean, ultimately, we decide on the projects, and we decide where they go. And clearly, the problem with our corridor is we have a sophisticated, modern, we're talking about rail here, of course, and it's not only rail, it's road as well, but the road also is highly developed in the western center part of the corridor. Now the motorway network and the rail, high-quality rail, goes all the way to Warsaw. After that, it's a missing link. The Baltic states, it's a single-track country railway line by Western standards, and so this has to be addressed first. So it would be very hard for the Dutch government to impose on the EU decision-making a project in an area which is already well improved and well developed over something which is completely missing. And I mean, they appreciate that. Of course, the funding rates are different too. In the Baltic states, we can finance up to 85%, whereas in the Netherlands, it's of course much less, being an old, established, and wealthy-ish EU member state.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have place for maximum 1 more question. If you would like to pose, this is the right moment. I can't see any volunteers to pose the question. Dear panel, concluding remarks, very brief remarks you would like to share, some final reflections with the audience here and me, a humble moderator. Anyone would like to? Very brief final conclusions. Malla, please.
Thank you. I'd like to add 1 little component to the discussion, or to the audience and our minds to elaborate in the future, and that is concerning the business sector. Because eventually when we think about transport volumes, it's about operators, the customers, and the suppliers of the service. And since the regulation is about the corridor perspective, the information that we do not have currently, hopefully we will have after quite a few studies, is something to do with a transport paradigm from a corridor perspective. Because this information hasn't been compiled yet. We know transport volumes from a local perspective, parts of the corridor, for instance, in the context of North Sea Baltic, how it goes in the Baltic states, to Finland, to Russia, Poland, Germany, and then the western part. But a paradigm, a research that really would bring these perspectives together and then consider the development needs from the business point of view. That's something that's completely missing at the moment.
Thank you very much. Radek, I think you were first, and then Horst.
Yes, 2 points. One related to the strategy versus Baltic Sea strategy versus TEN-T policy. To conclude what happened since 2009, I would say, unfortunately, we didn't manage to influence TEN-T policy by Baltic Sea strategy. It was the Baltic strategy which was following the TEN-T discussion, and it should be another way around. But it doesn't mean nothing for future, so we should keep trying to influence TEN-T policy by Baltic Sea strategy. Unfortunately, it was not the case. It was not the case this time. And the second point is, again, about TEN-T policy, which is our common policy. But sometimes I have an impression that we are forgetting something, that the points of departures, the point of departure in each country is completely different. There are some countries which are thinking about greening of corridors. Sweden, my perfect example, I would say. And there are some countries which are thinking about corridors as such. So points of departure are completely different. And to some countries and to some regions, to reach the status which is expected by TEN-T regulations, requires significantly more, not only financial sources, but also institutional sources and human sources. So point of departure is really an important thing when we are thinking about TEN-T policy.
Horst, please.
What?
I think that will be the final comment from the panel.
Three.
Very brief, please.
3 points, 3 short points. First of all, I think the place-based multi-level participation is not only relevant for the regions, it's also relevant for realizing TEN-T policy, at least in Germany, because you can't nearly build it's nearly impossible to build any bigger infrastructure if you don't have regional added value or you can't communicate it. I think place-based approach, place-based communication structures are relevant. Secondly, I think that the urban nodes of the network, from a strategic point of view, are the same interesting and the same important than the cross-border bottlenecks, because there is a danger that these urban nodes will be the future bottlenecks of the network. Well, as to be seen along the traditional axis in more on the Western and European side. Well, we have the bottlenecks not along the corridors, we have the bottlenecks in the nodes, and that has to be avoided. And certainly, I think, therefore, I would come back to my vision. What we need is, on the one side, the corridor coordination on the long stretch, but on the other side, we have to have these groups focused on regional points and Scandinavian corridor, the crossing the Baltic Sea from southern Sweden, and you have the nodes and something more. There are also a lot of already existing cooperation, Scandinavian arena or something like that, that could be used. And Malla, you mentioned there are so many private stakeholders, but I think the most of them are already grouped into Interact projects and some other communication structures where the coordination approach could be coordinated with, and then you have a place-based approach and you have a long-term discussion.
Thank you very much. Dear audience, I'm addressing you now with kind thanks for being with us all the time. Although we've crossed the timeline of 1 p.m. by 4 minutes, but I hope that you will still manage to get your lunch. For those of you who are not fed up yet with the thematics presented here, we have a good news. There will be a session held by BSR TransGovernance project that I'm leading and managing this afternoon at 3:30 at Sokol's Hamburger Börs Hotel. So you are most welcome in case you feel like discussing and putting on some, and also pressing some Mentometers buttons to get your feelings and perspectives about the development for transport networks. First of all, big thanks to the panel and big applause. Dear panelists, thank you very much for being here with us. For myself, it's been a very interesting, very thrilling session that I think we avoided, as some speakers used to say before, blah, blah, blah. So it was very concrete, down-to-the-ground discussion. So once again, big thanks to you. And dear audience, you are dismissed. Thank you, and enjoy your lunch.